Hey everybody, welcome back. Jake Wiskerson, Zephyr Wellness, and this might just be a Noggin Notes podcast too, so I'll mention Noggin Notes. It's just me opining, and for the first time I'm doing a little simulcast with the video and the audio, and I want to introduce a concept that may make some people's heads pop, but that concept is that 2020 actually hasn't been quite so bad. I know it's popular convention and the narrative suggests that 2020 is the worst year ever or whatever. Um, but there's been a lot of years in human existence, and I'm not sure that 2020 is the worst. I don't even know if it makes the top 1,500 years that have ever existed. But I'm not a historian. I'm a psychotherapist, and I do, counseling and talk therapy for a living. And from my perspective, as a guy who studies this stuff and works with couples and families and children, I think that maybe there's some joy to be found among the wreckage. And certainly there's been a lot of wreckage, a lot of stuff that we're not accustomed to, a lot of stuff that our individual expectations, had for ourselves that didn't get aligned with reality. And when our expectations are not aligned with reality and reality fails to fulfill our expectations, we get disappointment. We get a lot of sadness. And when we experience sadness, if we're not used to tolerating that emotion, we sometimes reach for anger or contempt, or we rationalize and we explain away, or we blame shift. And blame shifting is where we offload the person or the people or the thing that's responsible onto something else to make it make more sense in our head. But I'd like to get away from all that for a second and just maybe for the next few minutes reflect on things that have been positive. And these are anecdotal. They affect my life and maybe they affect yours too. So I by no means want to suggest that everybody's experiencing the same thing. If you've listened to me talk on YouTube or on the podcast for any length of time, you know that my particular framework on how we live life should not be predicated on experiential comparison, because experiences can always vary. I mean, we can watch the same ball game together and have very, very different emotional experiences, but the emotions beneath those experiences are absolutely common among humans. And I also happen to believe, studying this stuff for some time, that if we direct our attention to something else, we're going to generate a mood or some emotions that are different perhaps than what the environment is presenting to us. And that's what we call in my world a reframe. So if something negative happens to me, I can reframe that and say, yeah, this sucked, and not but, and alongside the suck, I can identify something positive to gain from this, a growth experience perhaps, or maybe somebody had some new perspective, or we got to accomplish something different that we didn't know we were capable of. So some of these things that have experienced, that we've experienced throughout 2020 might include the traditional occurrences that occur through any year, and those would be births, of which I've known 3 in my personal life. And when we welcome new life into the world, I think that's really very cool, and it should be celebrated. I certainly am happy to welcome new babies and provide them some guidance and leadership, and encourage the same in their parents. Yes, there's been a lot of death, and we want to acknowledge that, and we want to mourn it and grieve it appropriately. And simultaneously, we don't want to let the sadness of losing someone, say to COVID, overwhelm or invalidate the experience of bringing new life into the world. And I think it's beautiful that we have new babies coming into the world. Something else that has happened this year, I've been a wedding officiant for 5 or 6 years now, 7 years maybe, and I've married several couples. And in this year, for the first time ever, I got to marry 2 different couples in the same year. And I think that's really special too, and it's very precious. One of those couples got married, and they took advantage of the COVID restrictions, and when the restrictions were lifted back in May and June, They rapidly scheduled their wedding, asked me to officiate, and we did it up at Lake Tahoe, and it was very beautiful. The second one occurred in the backyard of my next door neighbor's house, and I was absolutely overwhelmed with the idea that I would be selected to officiate this wedding, which had to occur in Nevada so that they could be officially legally married, because the next celebration will be in Mexico in a year or so. And I think that's really, really cool. So there's been some celebrations materially, some celebrations that we can put our finger on and make sure that we're paying honor to those processes and not just like throwing our hands in the air and saying, everything sucks, because everything doesn't suck. Everything is one of those extreme language words that we want to try to avoid, at least in my profession, because extreme language invites in an opportunity for binary thinking. And binary thinking is when we go into the either or mindset, all or nothing, great or terrible, black or white. And I've got a different video about this on YouTube about how binary thinking begets anxiety, because you're essentially trapped between two extremes. And unfortunately, through the course of our 2020, some of the political chaos and civil unrest that has befallen our country and across the world has pushed people into extremes. And extremes don't benefit humanity at all. They promote tribalism, and unless you're in one camp, then you're not like the other camp, and so forth. And if you can't get along, then you must fight. And I take issue with that. I don't think you must fight. I don't think you must be in one camp. I think the concept of intersectionality is a good thing. I don't necessarily think that intersectionality, when you're claiming victim status, is a good thing. I think there's a difference between being a victim and playing a victim, meaning carrying the victim status forward, such that you can't ever grant grace or forgiveness. I think that's probably detrimental to our human relationships. But what I'm trying to do is pull people out of those encampments and bring them more toward the center, and realize that we have more to celebrate and be thankful for than probably we give proper credit. Some other great things that have come out of this is that even though we've been isolated through the lockdowns and so forth, we've actually been able to foster and promote and develop some different relationships that never may have existed had it not been for that. So think about our previous world, wherein we had to take meetings in person, usually, in a conference room or over lunches or coffees or whatever. And now we get to do it over Zoom. And I say get to very, very specifically and purposefully, because Zoom was that thing that was kind of thought about as an after effect. And sure, pick Microsoft Teams or any of your favorite online platforms. But the point is that through telecommunication, we've now been able to connect with people in a different way that we never have before. And through that, I have found some really cool opportunities to promote and develop some really neat initiatives that are helping folks. Yeah, sure, we're locked away and we're isolated and we have to wear masks and separate and so forth. But what we're getting instead is some different ways of promoting what we're doing, and that actually inspires some ingenuity. And that's one of the other great benefits of this pandemic, is that it's compelled people like my profession, the profession of psychotherapy and counseling, to become competent at telehealth. Now, a lot of us in this realm have been suspicious of telehealth, thinking almost like it's something of the occult or to be avoided. That there's risks to hacking and privacy issues and all that stuff, and what do we do if somebody's in a crisis in the middle of a session, and how do we respond? Well, what we've learned is that we need to take adequate account for where the person is and what their address is and what their local resources are, so that we can gently shepherd them through whatever they may be going through in the middle of the session. And I think that's really, really cool. Telehealth is here to stay. And in a humble brag, back in March, I predicted that this would be one of the many silver linings to emerge from the pandemic and from the lockdowns. I thought that it would be a good thing that counselors would be forced to become good at executing talk therapy through a virtual platform. And as it turns out, we have become very, very good at that. And while some people lament this change and they long for, the days of yesteryear when we could sit in the same office and feel each other's energy in person, and there is some merit to that. I think what it's offered us is the opportunity to break down some barriers and promote more care access, not just geographically to rural areas like in Nevada. I'm in northern Nevada, and I'm in an urban community in the Truckee Meadows, Reno Sparks area. But Nevada is comprised of about 110,000 square miles, about 88,000 square miles of which are not urban. And those people way out in the distant communities don't have access to things like mental health counseling. So I'm very proud that we've established this and that we've trained up our clinicians to be competent in this area now, so that people in the remote outlying areas can now receive the counseling that maybe they couldn't before, or maybe they were suspicious of, or maybe we were hesitant to deliver. So I think that's really cool, and I think that's here to stay. And it's not just, like I said, it's not just geographic distance. Now, we can do telehealth on the side of the road. You whip out your phone, get on the Zoom meeting, pull over, and have your appointment. If you're running late, if there's inclement weather, you can stay home. Obviously, illness allows for this to happen. People who have to get their kid from school, typically they might have to go home, get changed, shovel some food down their kid's throat, and then come to the office. Now they don't have to do that anymore. They can just go home and say, hey, we're not going to make it on time or in person. And they don't have to cancel their appointment. They don't have to skip their care, which I think is super, super cool. One of the really cool things that's emerged also is the advent of really aggressive research into disease study. I'm not an immunologist, and I don't know how immunology works. I have some rudimentary knowledge from my high school biology class and some stuff I took in college, but what I'm seeing is very, very encouraging about globally. We've got doctors and PhD level people who are studying this stuff in a more fervent pace, and because of the telecommunication, they're able to exchange information a lot faster and achieve goals that were previously thought unthinkable, like creating a vaccine or multiple iterations of the vaccine to deal with COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2. And that's pretty special, I think, and it's to be celebrated. So, there's an old saying that says, through trying times comes ingenuity, or, pick your adage that, out of adversity comes new creation and whatnot. I think that's to be elevated, and I think we need to do a better job of saying, hey, good job, scientists. Like, you've done a really remarkable series of work and effort to help humanity. I don't know that we would have been forced to do that had we not faced this pandemic. So along those lines too is an increased interest in self-care. People have been interested in self-care and whatnot, and so on and so forth for quite some time. But now that we're stuck at home and we don't want to go interact with people, without masks and, breathe germs on each other like we used to, thinking that, our bodies will just, maybe we'll get sick, from the Christmas party or whatever and come home. Now we've got this looming threat of some disease that's a little more sinister and a little more serious than maybe we ever took credit. And so what we've done is we've actually helped people to understand that the idea of self-care really matters. And that to me is twofold. So it bifurcates into take care of your physiological health by wearing a mask, staying separate from people, honoring that not everybody's where you are, and maybe they're caring for at-risk populations in their homes, or maybe they intermingle with them. But also the mental self-care that comes along with job loss and separation and all the distress and anxiety that is associated with that, such that we take more time to slow down, meditate, pray, engage with spiritual exploration, read more. Really good literature out there that we never wanted to cover, never had a reason to, and now we are, because we're sort of in this this ambivalent, nebulous world where nothing is certain anymore. And so what do? We press in and we start reading what some of the ancient authors had written long ago about, remarkably, what is affecting us right now. So concepts like being at peace, non-attachment, pragmatism, stoicism are now coming to the forefront. And I think it's wise that we revisit these concepts like liberty and humanity and respecting where people are. That is all, in my estimation, under the umbrella of self-care. And I think that's something that 2020 has brought us. It's brought us the ability to sit down and really examine where we are, who we are, where we're going, and what we want to do with life. And I think that's really special. I've talked and posted at length about my fears about suicidal ideation, anxiety, depression, child abuse, domestic violence, and so forth. The flip side of that coin is it's now also invited other people in to take a look at those are also pandemics, and really examine them in great detail, such that we become almost, I guess, curious about new strategies. So if it hasn't been working before, what can we do differently now that it's, the magnifying glass is on us and things have become augmented? And I think that's really, really cool. What it's forced to is partnerships and different campaigns and collaboration. So yeah, we may have gotten some money from the federal government, at least in the United States. And if you're listening to this overseas, maybe your government has done the same, maybe it hasn't. But the point is, we've now got an actual commitment to healthcare. I hope that it's sustainable. I really do. I hope that it's sustainable, and I know that hope is not a strategy. So my invitation through this soliloquy, this sermon, if you will, is that if you find yourself motivated to sustain this kind of effort, that you really activate to go talk to your legislative representatives and ask them to make an affirmative commitment to healthcare, and not just print some money and cut some checks and pretend that the problem is going to go away, but actually really, really commit some resources, maybe not just money, but through some other incentives like student loan forgiveness would be a great opportunity. Right now, the hurdles for student loan forgiveness, if you're serving in the healthcare community, are pretty substantial. You have to meet certain criteria, and you have to serve various demographics and whatnot. But I think that our need has now outstripped those certain criteria, those certain parameters, that we can't just pretend that we're going to forgive student loans and that's going to entice people to go serve 200 miles away from wherever you live or work. It's in urban areas too. And let's face it, like as a nation, we're facing a provider shortage. And certainly in Nevada, where I'm recording from, this is we're in the dead last, 51st per Mental Health America's survey, 51st for many years running. And that's, of course, there's 50 states in the union. There's the District of Columbia. So if you factor that in, we're dead last. And if Nevada can pull itself together and maybe make a recommitment to healthcare, we're going to have something really cool spawn out of this apparently otherwise abysmal 2020. And I don't know that it's that abysmal. It's taught us about resilience too. Resilience, the ability to bounce back. I've done a couple of videos on resilience now about how we learn to tolerate distress, and then we learn to get through the distress because it's temporary. And then the cool thing about that is on the other side of the distress tolerance, we get to bounce back. Of course, we'll be well and we'll learn from that and so forth. But we get to teach other people too. So all the people who are observing us through this time, if we ourselves can be resilient, then we also learn to teach others how to be resilient. And I think that's kind of a lost art for a lot of people who are 3 or 4 generations removed from the great global wars, even the Cold War, which ostensibly ended in the late 80s and early 90s between the so-called West and the East. I don't know that anybody who's under the age of about 40 really appreciates what that is, or really even under the age of 50. And I think what that's done is it's allowed us to find a new way of being resilient. We learn to lean in on our communities. We grab each other and pull together, with masks and with appropriate physical distancing, of course. But it also allows us to maybe tap some resources that we previously took for granted, and maybe look to our elders a little bit too, and say, hey, what did you learn, Grandma and Grandpa, or Mom and Dad, from the times that you had to endure distress? One of the things that I've opined on lately is the idea that we've lost our distress tolerance with instant gratification with our mobile devices and our tablets and whatnot. The ability to just look up information at less than a second's time passing. We can just type something in. We no longer have to go to the card catalog and look it up in the library. There's no more encyclopedias. We just have the Google machine, right? And so what happens when an entire generation, or 3 generations even, has become so accustomed to getting things delivered instantly that we lost the ability to be patient? Maybe this pandemic is allowing us the opportunity to sit on our asses and be patient and just wait. And just wait. There's no magic bean that's going to fix this, and I've talked about that in different avenues as well. So maybe 2020 hasn't been so bad. Maybe 2020 has forced us to be more innovative as well in the way that we bring things like concerts and events to people. Sure, we've got empty stadiums, but sports are still being played, and we get to cheer for our teams. And education is now finding itself in this new realm whereby we don't get the captive audience in front of us in the classroom anymore, but we get a captive audience online. And that maybe has compelled some people, professors, teachers, and so forth, to get really creative about how they deliver their content. And if you're not delivering content that captures the imagination and brings people in, you got to get better at it if you want to keep your job. You got to get better at it if you just want to deliver what's in your head, and the old lecture format doesn't work. You got to get creative with new media and alternative media and different ways to reach people. So I'm actually inspired. I think that this is, for all the woes that we lament and for all the death and destruction that are put into the headlines and so forth, I think it's really compelled a lot of folks to take stock of what they have in life and really be appreciative of it. And if you haven't yet, here's your chance. Instead of taking your disappointment and channeling it into angry, vitriolic posts online and maybe drawing political lines around people in different encampments, maybe don't do that. Maybe humble yourself. If you don't have the answer, be humble and receive new information. And if you do really truly have the answer, maybe humble yourself and present it in a different way that's not going to be off-putting to your intended audience. So irrespective of what you have to offer or what your position may be, I think humility needs to resurface too. And maybe that's another opportunity that 2020 has brought us. So we've had record-setting fires, and we've had civil unrest, and we've got riots in cities, and peaceful protests turned into riots and hijacked by movements that don't have the best interests in mind, and we've got all sorts of disease and people dying, and of course it's being pumped into our psyches through headlines and different avenues that want to advertise and generate money and all that. Maybe this is an opportunity for us to say, you know what? I don't need the information overload. Maybe I don't need to drink out of a fire hose all the time. Maybe we need to return to peace and tranquility that we really haven't ever embraced for the last couple of generations because we've been so interested in pursuing quarter four outperforming quarter three and sacrificing our families so that we can go to the office and get business done. And maybe just pause, take a time out and pull back, be present with each other. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. There was a great attempt, and it was so well received that it got bought out. I guess some good news I think was one of the great things to come out of this, because it makes us pivot our attention away from all the death and destruction and start paying attention to the way that people are bouncing back and the way that communities support each other. And yeah, sure, there's graffiti all over the place after a riot, and then what doesn't get covered very often is the resurgence afterward that several citizens go out and scrub off the graffiti and clean up the wreckage. And so maybe if we don't engage in that, maybe if we are aware of the contemptuous nature that living in this world tugs us into, we can resist that and start to re-engage in helping each other. I think that's a real positive. I think it really, really brings folks together if you allow yourself to do it. And I'm not saying that everybody's allowing themselves to do it, for sure. There's still people who want to stake their claim and carve out their own turf and say, beyond this line you shall not cross, and if you cross it, then I will shun you, or whatever. But maybe that doesn't need to rule the day. Maybe what needs to rule the day is the idea that we refocus our thinking brain on stuff that's positive, and then we'll feel a lot better. And please don't interpret this as my invitation to pretend that bad things don't happen. Bad things are happening all over the place. It's one of our natural, innate responses to environment. It comes from our limbic system, which is in the middle/rear part of our brain. The limbic system is comprised of 10 essential emotions. I talk a lot about this, one of which is disgust. And it's okay to have disgust against things like racism and totalitarian governments, things that are simply unhealthy for humanity. We should fight those things. Excuse me. We should fight against overreaching governmental representation. We should fight against fascism. And we should fight against racism. And we should fight against things that don't bring people together. Any separation that's not based in logic and begets violence is not good. That has all happened in 2020. And yet still, there are people, and I will use myself as an example, who are fighting to walk through the middle of the chasm and try to invite people into it. Because people like me, and there are many, many others out there, don't necessarily believe that the two extremes are the only thing that exists. We absolutely fundamentally believe that most people live in the middle of the so-called bell curve. And if you live in the middle there and you're wondering where to go, drop your sword, man. Stop slaying other people. Stop lashing out. Start to invite people in. Don't get into the power struggles. Be at peace. Invite people into your peace, and teach that to your children. Please, for the love of all that is human and for the future of humanity, invite people into your peace. If you've got it, shout it from the rooftops, but don't beat people over the head with it, because a lot of folks are just simply not in that spot right now, and we don't need to, berate them or judge them for not being where we are. We need to be where they are. And if they're angry and they're destructive, and they want to, have beef with whatever they have beef with, our job as the peacemakers, as the peacekeepers, is to go to them and invite them in to see what's possible in the middle of the chasm. It's not so dark. It's not so deep. It's definitely not irrecoverable. And I think that there's great positive opportunity to come out of this. We don't just simply shrug it off and say, positive vibes only. That's not what we do. We want to acknowledge the hurt and the possibility for redemption. So, this is just my way of saying all is not lost. Let's not give over to the extreme language of 2020 sucks entirely and altogether, top to bottom. That's not true. It's fundamentally not true. And I ticked off several examples of why that's not true. Weddings, births, recovery, resilience, doubling down of commitments to serve others ahead of self. Those are all great things that have come out of this. So if you're watching this or you're listening, I invite you to notice the areas in your life where you have happiness, where you have peace. And while you grieve the losses and you strategize how to navigate the scary stuff, please also anchor yourself into the benefits that have come into your life through the course of this otherwise ugly year. And don't give over to the extreme language that it's horrible and that it's terrible and that everything sucks, because it doesn't. So if I may be so bold, I would invite you to consider that 2020 isn't actually all bad. There are bad things, but there's always bad things in every year. And this year, through the bad things, we see opportunities to become great, but we also want to acknowledge the positive things that have happened in this year that would have happened in any other year and not discount them. Hope you find this informational. If you want to reach out to me or any of us, info@zephyrwellness.org. We also have a couple of podcasts, of which I'm a part, Noggin Notes and Walk the Talk America. The Walk the Talk America podcast is called Guns and Mental Health. You can go info@wtta.org or info@nogginnotes.com. Love to hear your feedback. And please move forward loving each other. I love what I do. I love bringing hope to humanity. And I really hope that this reaches you too. Share it with somebody else. This stuff doesn't do any good locked up in my head. So please spread the message. 2020 has not entirely sucked. Thanks as always for listening. I'm Jake. Enjoy your day.